Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wheeler, deja vu all over again.
Sir?
Thank you for being here. I enjoyed the time you and I had to visit in my office. I want to cover a number of issues. I want to start with spectrum. It is my view that the federal government should own or control as little spectrum as possible, consistent with national security and law enforcement needs. Do you agree with that principle?
If I could tweak it a bit, the federal government should be efficiently using spectrum to a point where it uses the minimal amount of spectrum necessary to do its job.
What do you see? I mean, as you know, there has been a long history of reluctance by those federal agencies that have control over portions of spectrum. There's been a long history of reluctance to relinquish that control. What do you see as the most effective tools Congress can implement to shift more and more of that spectrum into private hands where it can generate jobs and economic growth?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, sir. And I think there are many. One, as I indicated before, the bright light that you are focusing on spectrum now is so different than the days when I was negotiating with the federal government over spectrum, and that can only help. Secondly, I think that I would hope that part of that bright light would be an encouragement to think about how new technology has changed the use of spectrum. Doing things the way we've always done them isn't the answer for tomorrow. And most spectrum has been allocated with analog concepts in mind. And living in a digital world, we can think differently. And thirdly is the issue of creating the necessary incentives for the federal government users to become efficient and to want to put the spectrum to other uses. And I think all of those reside here. I think if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed, sir, I will be forthright in calling for these kinds of changes, but I think that you all, frankly, are the ones who actually are in control of that.
Well, I look forward to hopefully working with you to accomplish that.
Thank you, Senator.
Let me shift to a different topic, which is, as you know, in recent months, two of the President's cabinet nominees have sat where you were sitting, and I asked both of them if they would commit. My top priority is economic growth, and critical to economic growth is regulatory reform, reducing the burdens of federal regulation on small businesses, on job creation. So I asked each of those two nominees if they would commit within the first 100 days to identifying at least 3 existing federal regulations that should be modified or repealed because they're impeding job creation. One of them agreed to do so. And a second one actually upped the ante and said that he thought 3 was insufficient. He agreed to find 10 instead. So I want to ask you the same question.
Well, I don't want to get into the game here. I'll see his 10 and raise him 10. But I will take.
I would welcome 20.
I will take a slightly different tact on that. As I have been preparing for this hearing, I've been asking myself that question. I wrote a book on Lincoln's use of the telegraph. I'm kind of fascinated with the first electronic communications network that we ever had. I discovered that the telegraph rules are still in place at the FCC. I'd like to take a look at whether that makes any sense. And that is my philosophy, sir, of looking at all of the rules with that kind of an eye.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and I hope we can work together. In particular, look, I think getting rid of the telegraph rules makes a lot of sense, but I think in particular, obviously, targeting those rules that are really impacting productivity and job creation is, I know, a priority of ours, and I hope we can work together on that. I want to briefly touch on the question of unlocking phones. And you mentioned contract law, and that's obviously a matter between private parties. In your opinion, should federal law prohibit or criminalize consumers unlocking their phones?
I think that a consumer has if the consumer fulfills their side of the bargain, they ought to have the right to unlock their phone.
Would you support a permanent exception to the DMCA for cell phones and other wireless devices?
I think that first, I think it's an extension now that has caused all kinds of problems that we need to deal with. I don't right now, sir, know whether it is a permanent exemption, whether it is a rewrite of the Copyright Act, or what the appropriate solution is. But I do believe that there needs to be a solution, and consumers should have the right to unlock their phones after they've lived up to their side of the deal.
Well, terrific. I look forward to working with you on that. The final issue I want to address is one that's come up already, the Disclose Act. Mm-hmm. As you know, there are few, if any, issues that inspire more passionate partisan divisions in this body. This body has repeatedly failed to pass the Disclose Act because a substantial number of members of this body believe it is unconstitutional and bad policy. In your judgment, does the FCC have the authority to implement the Disclose Act or to otherwise regulate political speech?
As I have said before, that's an issue that I look forward to learning more about. There is a pending proceeding on that exact question, and I need to look at that proceeding and to become informed. But I do not miss the expression on both sides of this dais as to the strong feelings, and I know that this is an issue of tension.
Well, Mr. Wheeler, as you know, every Republican on this committee, along with Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, sent a letter to your predecessor on this issue. And you and I visited in my office. You said you need to study the issue more. I would ask you to submit in writing an answer to this question. And I would note, as you and I visited privately, this is the one issue that, in my opinion, has the potential to derail your nomination. And I don't want to see that happen. I think the Commission has a very important role. But should the Commission leave that role and get into the business of regulating political speech, we've seen with the IRS what can happen when members of Congress urge the executive branch to begin playing politics. And so I look forward to reading your written response in terms of whether you believe the Commission has the authority to implement the Disclose Act or to regulate political speech.
Thank you, Senator.